Hi everyone, this is Phil Travis, and this announcement is for History 448 here at Eastern Oregon University, the history of modern Russia, and this is week 6. So this week we are really going to be thinking about preparing for our test and getting some work done on our research paper. We have a midterm exam this week, and I have placed for you a study guide for the midterm exam in the modules area. And it's really just a tip on what the essay question will be. So the test is made up of a series of multiple choice true-false questions drawn from the readings and also from the class lectures. And then you have an essay, and the essay is designed to be 4 or 5 paragraphs. It should be very specific and concise. And so I've given you the topic in there. I've kind of shown you what the essay question will be. And the idea is there that it'll help you prepare, because it is a question that really extends throughout the entirety of the first 5 weeks of the class. And so I want you to be able to really think about the best way to answer that question. Though with that said, please, under no circumstances would I like you to pre-write that essay. Do not pre-write that essay. Don't pre-write it and copy and paste it. I want you to write it as you take the test. And certainly you can have an outline to go off of and that kind of thing. But I would like to make sure that everyone writes the essay as they take the test, as opposed to like pre-writing something or pulling something from a discussion forum post or something like that. And remember, make sure that you're using your own words and that you're drawing on materials from our readings in class and also the class lectures on that. The essay is a pretty good chunk of your grade, so for the test. So make sure you prepare for this. I'm not assigning any reading this week, and the reason is we have a big research paper in this class that is a large chunk of your grade, and I'm going to get those paper proposals graded soon, so you can take my feedback and really start working on those. And then we have, of course, the midterm and the final. Those are the other 2 really big chunks of your grade in this course. And so I want you to really focus on being prepared for the midterm exam this week, and I want you to use this time to start really working on your research paper. I know that there's often, in college, we often get tempted to kind of leave the papers to the last second, and I really encourage you not to do that. If you're doing the research now and you're developing your ideas now, it's going to be a lot easier to submit a paper that is going to get you a good grade at the end of the term if you're really taking some of these important steps earlier in terms of developing the paper. And like I said, I'll get those paper proposals graded soon, so you can use my feedback in working on developing your paper, and I hope you use this week to develop your research paper. So there is no reading this week. We do have a discussion forum as always, and the discussion forum this week is the idea is to have some kind of convenient review for the test. I want you to discuss some of your the favorite aspects of the class that you've learned so far, the things you found most interesting or most significant, and then engage in a discussion as we always have. And I think we've had really great discussion forums, so I'm really happy with what we've been doing in the discussion forum this class. So this week I want you to select an item in the discussion forum. Select an item that you have found most intriguing or interesting that you've learned so far in the course, and make a post about it. And then let's engage in our usual discussion on that topic. Next week, we will start the second section of the course for the last 4 weeks leading up to the final exam. And this will begin with a discussion of the Cold War. We'll talk about the origins of the Cold War. Then we'll talk about the Soviet bloc in the 50s. We'll talk about Nikita Khrushchev and de-Stalinization. We will talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis from the Soviet perspective, the Berlin Wall. We'll also talk about the era of détente in the 1970s between, of course, Richard Nixon and Leonid Brezhnev. And we'll finish the course by talking about the period from Mikhail Gorbachev up to Vladimir Putin. And we'll engage in some discussions about Russia in the Putin era. So we will take this all the way up to present at the end of this second test section, which will culminate, of course, with our final exam and our research paper. So some really exciting stuff coming up. I am a specialist on the Cold War. My own book was related to the Cold War in the 1980s and the Reagan administration. So the Cold War is an area of great deal of interest for me. So I get very excited when we start talking about the Cold War. But in this class, we're going to be examining the Cold War from the Soviet perspective, which is even more intriguing, I think, for those of us in the United States, because we usually look at it through the lens of the West, and we will take the lens of the East, and we'll consider, some of the developments in the Cold War hopefully from a Soviet perspective or an Eastern perspective, at least, because we'll be considering the events in Hungary in the late 1950s, the Prague Spring, of course, as well. We'll be talking about the resistance movements in Poland and elsewhere. So we'll be looking at not just the Soviet perspective, but of course the Eastern perspective as well. So really exciting things coming up, and we'll be getting into that Taubman book on Khrushchev. We have more stuff to read in service as well. So some really good stuff coming up. Okay, factoid. Factoid for this week is this. Since we are going to be getting into the Cold War pretty soon, I thought I would share an interesting factoid about the end of the Second World War and the United States and the Soviet Union. So, of course, as I'm sure most of you are aware, during the Second World War, the United States conducted something called the Manhattan Project, which, of course, was the massive project to build the atomic bomb. Which, of course, the United States, under the President Harry Truman, knew by summer of 1945 that this had, in fact, that this project had succeeded. And, of course, the United States would drop an atomic bomb in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. Well, the United States had been sharing information about this project with the British for some time. Winston Churchill had a positive relationship, of course, with FDR, and then Truman, and the United States had shared information with the British about this program. Its other major ally, though, the Soviets, Stalin had not been shared information about this program, largely because of a sort of deep-seated distrust between Eastern communism, the Soviet Union, and Stalin, and Western capitalism and the United States. So at the Potsdam Conference, and this is really the factoid, at the Potsdam Conference in 1945, in July of 1945, Truman met with Stalin, and he basically told Stalin, he said, we have this kind of super weapon, if you will, that they're going to use. And, Stalin, sort of acknowledged, okay. And the reality was, though, is that behind the scenes, Stalin was pretty upset over this because Stalin already knew. And the reason Stalin knew about the program is because of espionage, of informants that had informed Stalin and the Soviet Union about this American program. And Stalin was quite unhappy with the United States that it had not shared that information with the Soviet Union. And so that revelation from the perspective of Stalin and the Soviet Union was one of the first major steps in sowing even deeper seeds of distrust between the United States and the Soviet Union that at the end of the war would, in the course of the next year or so, lead to a series of events that ultimately created the Cold War, events that were connected to a distrust between the two. Would the United States seek to hold on to the atomic monopoly, or would it give it up? Would the United States and the Soviet Union be able to unify Germany again, or would they disagree on the future course of Germany? These types of issues. What would the Soviet Union do when it came to access to oil in Iran, and how would the United States respond to that? Both sides tended to, after the war, draw a pretty hard line. And the consequences of that are, of course, the Cold War, which lasts from 1945, 1946, really until 1990-91 when the Soviet Union collapses. But you could say, this is the factoid, that the seeds of distrust were probably really beginning to be planted. I mean, they had been in some ways planted earlier, but had really begun to be planted significantly following the revelation that Truman made at Potsdam, where he told Stalin about this weapon, and the fact was that Stalin had already known. and he had known through informants. And as a result of this, the fact that the United States had not been upfront with him, it really began to sow the seeds for a level of distrust between the United States and the Soviet Union. So the Potsdam Conference and the atomic bomb and the kind of roots of the Cold War sort of tensions really connected to this attitude of distrust centered around the information surrounding the atomic bomb. Let's have a great week, everyone, and let me know if you have any questions. Prepare for that test, work on your research paper, and I'll see you in the discussion forum.